Hello, everyone. Welcome into the Guilty as Charged podcast YouTube channel here. I'm Alex, as always, hosting Bolt Breakdowns, a special post-game edition of the show, covering everything from the Chargers' 36-34 loss to the Miami Dolphins in Week 1, which I will say is not what I predicted on a number of fronts. I predicted a lower scoring game. I'm one of the people who took the under in the pregame prediction. I was like, oh, there'll be a little bit of a feeling out process, but no, it was just a shootout from the get-go. So, genius over here. But overall, I just kind of want to give some of my thoughts. I want to talk about the big thing that we have to talk about, which is the defense first, and then talk about the offense second, and then kind of wrap up in final thoughts. But Tyler and Steven titled their podcast last night defensive embarrassment, and that's what this was to me, like at its core. And I think it's a really tough defensive performance to look at for Staley in particular, because everybody was healthy, right? You have everybody that you wanted in this game: Bosa, Mack, newly signed Eric Kendricks in the linebacker group. You had everyone in the secondary, and this is the effort. 300 yards in the first half. I could read you the stats that are on the ESPN box score if you want. 466 yards for Tua and 3 touchdowns. He played really well today. Chargers did not get enough pressure on him, and even when they did get some pressure on him, he actually stepped up and made some really good throws. So I'm impressed with the game Tua had from his standpoint. Tyreek Hill, 215 yards, 2 touchdowns, 11 receptions. He was absolutely insane today. I don't even have a word to describe his performance other than just like, that guy is special. I think we underrate him and sometimes in terms of the, like who's the best receiver in the league conversation, because I think usually it'll go to Devontae or Justin Jefferson or somebody else. But man, when Tyreek is on one, he's on one. He had a great game. But also, so did the Dolphins' other receivers. Jalen Waddle stepping up for 478, drawing a clear pass interference penalty on J.C. Jackson that swung the game to some extent, which we'll get to in a second. And then, the rest of the offense for Miami was primarily through the air. They gave up 70 yards on the ground, which, I didn't think the run defense was personally the best today, because Miami primarily stopped running the ball in the second half when they didn't need to, and they realized they could just get whatever they wanted over the middle of the field. So I don't know if we can truly evaluate the run defense in that sense. But, the Dolphins also had 6 other receivers catch a ball other than Tyreek Hill. 5 of those 6 guys averaged 10 yards per reception, right? That is the critical thing when it comes to this defense for me, is, you could throw your hands up and be like, oh, it's Tyreek Hill, what are we going to do? It was everybody else burning them too. It was Braxton Berrios. It was River Craycraft. It was Alec Ingold. It was all of these guys, right, who, just kind of came out and had their coming out party to some extent. As much as we focus on the pregame on Hill and Waddle, like, the real like backbreaker plays that I think hurt the Chargers in this game outside of the Tyreek ones is when it's like, is Braxton Berrios seriously picking up a 3rd and 15 on the sideline? What are we doing with that in terms of the effort and coverage there? Like, that's kind of ridiculous, right? Like, on one hand, it's like you want to, give the defense a little bit of a break from the Tyreek stuff, but it's like, it just seemed so disorganized. And like I said earlier, this is Staley's group of guys that are going to be here for the rest of the season, unless injury happens, which obviously we hope not. And so for the pass rush, let's start at the first level. Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa, for it to be as anemic as it was today, is just not what you pay 2 edge rushers $25+ million for. And I don't know what the final pressure numbers will end up being for Mack and Bosa. I will assume Max pressures kind of end up a little bit better, just based on my initial watch of the game. But it wasn't a terribly impressive performance for Khalil Mack, in my opinion, or Joey Bosa, for that matter. I mean, Tua was allowed to kind of do whatever he want, drop back for 7 seconds and find Tyreek Hill in certain plays. And even when he was pressured, Tua actually did a good job of kind of stepping up in the pocket and making a big throw too. So, I don't know. I just think this pass rush is a bigger problem than maybe we think it out to be. I know in the first half you're not going to put a ton on Bosa and Mac because they were getting the ball out fast, but man, there was just nothing throughout the entirety of the game from those two guys. And it's just something that you cannot have happen, especially when the Chargers had the matchup advantage they did. Not having Teron Armstead should have been a godsend, so to speak, in this game, and it wasn't for the Chargers. And that's something that they're going to have to think about, both Mac and Bosa, coming out of this game. The linebacker room was just kind of, again, goes to the same with the secondary, like really disorganized in coverage. Why is Kenneth Murray like not on Smythe on 4th and 9? He like peels off, goes to the inside, and Smythe essentially walks to a first down on a pretty critical 4th and 9, situation there for Miami. I'm like, whoa, what are we doing? And honestly, I didn't think Eric Kendricks, outside of like one pass breakup, looked terribly good, and it wasn't the best thrown ball by Tua either. So like, I don't know. This linebacker group was a little bit concerning. Neiman played a little bit more than I thought he would. But I, certainly from the standpoint of like stopping the run, I didn't think they did a great job in that first and second quarter when the Miami was actually running the ball. And then in pass coverage, I just thought the linebackers kind of looked out of sorts. And then finally, shifting over to the third level of the defense, I guess here, and this is where a lot of the Chargers' problems were, and this is where I would put the most blame on Brandon Staley, which I'll get to in a second. You had JC, who gets burned a couple times. You have Michael Davis, who gets burned by Tyreek Hill. Even Derwin James gets burned by some of the other guys, including Craig Kraft on a pretty big catch. So like, it was not a good day for anyone in the secondary, really. I can't even imagine that anybody in the secondary escapes with a, not that we go by PFF grades, but a 50 or 60 grade in PFF in terms of coverage. Like, this was a tough day for the secondary. And, look, some of it is just like, look at the Tua to Tyreek fade route. Michael Davis plays the best possible coverage essentially he can on that play. And again, like I said earlier, you throw your hands up and you get beat because you're playing a generational wide receiver. At the same time, though, what I think falls on Staley in particular in this game is the lack of adjustments. And Brandon Staley says in the postgame that he made adjustments and they just didn't work out. I'm confused as to where these adjustments were. Like, that's what I want to know. Was the adjustment just pulling JC Jackson? Because you just left other guys to get burned in single coverage down the field, right? The third down near like the end of the game, or I think where Miami scored, 6 points, or it might have been the drive before. I don't totally remember, but they rushed 3, and then the Dolphins are just left, with Tyreek Hill essentially in single coverage on Jot Taylor. And it's just like, that cannot happen. Like, I don't know how it just continuously happening throughout the game. And look, Tyreek Hill is going to burn. He's going to get by guys. But for the Chargers to like never truly make an adjustment when Tyreek Hill was killing them and be like, all right, we got to double cover and we got to figure out what we're going to do. They never like made any adjustment. And of course you can play, okay, if they make an adjustment and it doesn't work out and somebody else, is open, then like, fine. But like, you just, especially considering the anemic pass rush the Chargers got today, you cannot let Tyreek Hill continuously do what he was doing to this defense. And that falls on Brandon Staley, in my opinion, in terms of just leaving his guys on an island with Tyreek Hill, whether it was Michael Davis, whether it was JC Jackson, whether it was whomever, and just trusting it to work. And I think he did it to some extent because it worked last year. And you had Michael Davis on Tyreek Hill, and Michael Davis played a really good game outside of giving up one big touchdown where he tripped over his own feet. And I think Staley, to some extent, was expecting to replicate some of that same leave Tyreek Hill on an island type, success that he had in last year's game. But, you're just not going to get that game from Tyreek Hill every time. And so for Staley to not come with the adjustments in the secondary and allow JC to get cooked, allow Michael Davis to get cooked, allow Jot Taylor, whomever it was, to get just roasted in single coverage by Tyreek, I was just like, what are we doing? Again, this goes back to my point with the linebackers in the secondary, but the whole thing looks so disorganized because it felt like early in that game, Staley realized his defensive plan wasn't working, and there wasn't an adjustment from him as much as he will claim that there was one. I didn't see it because it was just the same shit the whole game. In terms of the defense, just not having like any semblance of an answer for what Tyreek Hill was doing to them, and particularly for Staley, again, free releases, single coverage throughout the entire game. Like, if Tyreek is gonna like shake his hand after the game and be like, "Oh, thanks, man, that was really helpful for what you did for the Dolphins," like it might as well. So I don't know. That is where I am most concerned with this defense. Is in particular that secondary. Look, you're not going to give up 400 yards to a quarterback every day. You're not going to give up 200 yards to Tyreek Hill every day. But the most concerning thing for me is how bad the pass rush looks and how discombobulated the communication looks for the rest of the defense. And maybe this is a week 1 to 4 feeling out process type of a thing. But if this doesn't get better soon, the Chargers are going to be in big trouble later in the season when they play the Chiefs, even when they play the Vikings in 2 weeks, who have Justin Jefferson, who's known to give defenses problems as well. If they don't figure the communication aspect and, the coverage aspect out soon, this game is going to look like the, essentially symptom of a much bigger problem. So I hope we don't, get to that future, and I hope defense does improve next week. But to me, if you're associating this defense with 1 or 2 characters, I think it is on technically JC Jackson, given the game he had and the rest of the secondary having the games they had. Pass rush, like I mentioned earlier. But to me, this is on Staley. You had everybody healthy for this game, like I mentioned earlier. This is your defense. And for it to look as, like I said, discombobulated as it did, and just not operating at the efficiency in communication even that it should, it's a huge L for Brandon Staley in this game. Moving on to happy time. Offense looked really good. They scored 34 points. Justin Herbert, I think, had 228 yards, 23 completions. I think there will be a lot of people who talk about Justin Herbert's stat line in somewhat of a negative way, to some extent, because he didn't throw for 300, 400 yards, 4 touchdowns. But I thought Justin Herbert actually played a pretty awesome game from a cerebral standpoint, where he kind of knew where to throw the ball to draw penalties when he saw things in the secondary from Xavier Howard, from other Dolphins defenders. And I think, he did have a couple big plays to Keenan Allen and Mike, to Austin Eckler after dump off in the flats when he realized he was open, right? So it's like, to me, there was never that like Herbert, oh man, he just chucked it 50 yards down the field and it was a bomb type of moment, but the scheme kind of never really opened that up to him from some extent because they ran the ball 40 times and it was working, right? So for me, I thought Justin Herbert played a pretty fine game overall in this one. Austin Eckler, 117 yards, 1 touchdown. Joshua Kelly, 1 touchdown, 91 yards. This was an awesome game from Joshua Kelly, by the way, which we won't talk about in the minutia of things on Chargers Twitter because of the loss and because of how the defense looked. But it should not be lost how awesome Joshua Kelly was as a downfield runner, or as a downhill runner, I should say. He was great. The offensive line run blocking was terrific. It is like the best that I've ever seen, and you felt the impact of Slater being back, and you felt the impact of this whole offensive line finally, working together as it should. And they did really good in pass protection, which, I say that as a whole game sample size, which makes that final drive worse, where they give up the 2 sacks, obviously, on Justin Herbert. But, for most of this game, this offensive line was lights out, in terms of, the run game and in terms of protecting Justin Herbert, which I think should not be lost. You certainly felt the impact, even not watching an all 22, of what Slater's impact was in this game, what Salyer's impact was in this game, so on and so forth. Kind of a weird receiving day for the Chargers. I think Keenan Allen had 6 receptions for 76 yards, Mike 4 for 45, Eckler 4 for 47, but a lot of that came on the one big, flat catch. Quentin Johnston one reception essentially for 11 yards. I know he had two, but I think the yardage from the pitch play that didn't work, that got blown up by Wilkins, got counted in that. So, I was a little bit surprised by Quentin Johnston not being more active, honestly, in the receiving game. I know the coaching staff continuously came out and said, hey, it's Allen and Williams and then Palmer, and then Johnston and Darius Davis. But I thought there was some more ample opportunity to get him involved in this game, especially when they were actually getting Darius Davis involved and motioning him quite a lot. I thought that Johnston could have served a bigger role in this game, but they kind of decided that wasn't how they were going to play. And again, it wasn't why they lost because, again, they end up running the ball as well as they did. But that's going to be an interesting thing to watch throughout the couple weeks. Josh Palmer in this game, 1 reception for 4 yards. I did not notice Josh Palmer too many times creating mismatches down the field or creating a opportunity that Herbert should have thrown that he didn't. So I'll just kind of say that about Palmer. But yeah, I mean, look, overall, it was the day that you wanted from the offense. Kellen Moore finally looks like he's fixed the run game. Now, how much of that was Kellen Moore and how much of that was Fangio kind of allowing the Chargers to do what they did in the run game? That's a fair conversation. But going against this Miami front seven, to have the wins that they did in the run game after Dolphins were 4th in run defense last year, I thought it was a really impressive effort all the way around for Eckler, for Kelly, the offensive line. And I think the receivers, even though it wasn't Justin Herbert slings it for 300, 400 yards type of game, did their part. I think Mike Williams was a little bit off at points this game because he did get evaluated for a concussion, then cleared, returned to the game. But, so I thought that, he kind of looked a little disorganized throughout the whole game. I'd be curious to kind of watch on all 22, and see, how he kind of played throughout this game. But yeah, look, just as a sentiment here, most of the times when you score 34 points, you win the game. And the Chargers didn't because of the other side of the ball today. So to me, that still is the story. If you look back at the Chargers 2022 schedule, they scored 34 points one time against the Texans, and 34 points would have won them all their games except 2 of them against Seattle and Jacksonville last year. So very positive day for the offense as a whole. It is kind of a shame, and I know Steven talked about this in the post-game episode of the pod, but it is a little bit of a shame that we can't get on here and goo goo gaga all over the offensive line and how great that looked in the run blocking. I did that a little bit, but obviously the impact of this game going forward when they go to play Tennessee and in their next couple games here has got to be this defensive communication. It has to be worked out. I hope that it is. I hope Staley kind of has, a productive meetings this week because this defense needs to come together in a significant way. And I hope Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa can bounce back as well. Because if they don't, if this is just kind of what Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa are, and again, that's a week 1 overreaction, but if this is the level you get through them throughout the season, then this Chargers defense, in more ways than one, is kind of cooked. Because they don't really have other people that can generate that pressure. This is what you're paying both of those guys $25 million to do, like I said earlier. And yeah, just need to see more from J.C. Jackson. I think you will see bounce back games from Michael Davis and Asante Samuel Jr. next week as they go play the Titans. Should be, in theory, an easier matchup. If we're talking after the game next week and Ryan Tannehill has 300 yards, we have bigger problems and bigger fish to fry. But I do think ultimately the Chargers probably, I won't give a score prediction, but I do think from an defensive standpoint that they will have a more stout effort against that Tennessee offense. The thing to be concerned about is Derrick Henry because their run defense didn't get particularly tested in this game after Miami stopped kind of throwing the ball. So I hope the Chargers run fits from the first and second quarter of this game adjust a little bit better when they do play Henry next week. But ultimately, yeah, I just think, you got to take all the guys on the defense, including Staley, to the woodshed for this one, because it's just kind of inexcusable that they lost this game based off of that offensive effort. But again, like I said, the offense was really good. I was really impressed by what I saw from the lines, Really impressed by what I saw from Herbert, honestly, even though, he didn't have the big stat line game. I thought it was a real cerebral game from him. And I think he has a lot of things that he can build on kind of going forward here. But yeah, that's just sort of the bottom line for me. Defense needs to be better and more organized. Otherwise, the Chargers are going to have some really, really big problems soon. And the offense looked really good. That Kellen Moore guy, he's really cooking up a thing. Maybe he should be the one running the team. But anyway, I'll leave you with that thermonuclear take. Anyway, see you guys on the next episode of Bolt Breakdowns after we talk next week. I will be not live, but after the Titans game, I will be recording an episode of Bolt Breakdowns that will post as well. So I know this episode was a little bit up and down in terms of the defense and the offense, but hopefully next week we are back here celebrating a much needed Chargers win to avoid going to 0-2. This is a big game for this team and this regime after this week. So see you guys next time. As always, despite the loss, bolt up.